It's Monday, Common Sense Army, and on today's episode of the Why I'm Right podcast, we're breaking down FISA, that's the Foreign Intel Surveillance Act. We're going to talk about how it's impacting every single American in this nation, every single one of our freedoms, and how it could change the way our government has control over us for years and years to come. So make sure you stay tuned because this episode's critically important. This is the Why I'm Right show, and I'm going to tell you why I'm right.
We live in a world filled with noise and confusion, clickbait, and outright lies in the media. But here, we cut through the clutter to find the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. This is Why I'm Right, the podcast where we dig deeper, ask the tough questions, and unravel the tangled webs of political and current events. Join us as we dissect the latest news, analyze political rhetoric, and challenge the narratives that dominate the mainstream discourse. We're not shy. From dissecting the motives behind policy decisions to uncovering the hidden agendas of public figures, it's what we do. It's time to think for ourselves. This is Why I'm Right. And now your unafraid and unapologetic host, Matt Taylor.
He's right. Welcome back to the Why I'm Right show. Today we have an episode, like I said earlier, we're breaking down FISA. Before we hop into that, I just want to say, if this is your first episode, we're happy to have you. If you're already a part of the Common Sense Army, I'm happy you're here as well, because every single day we are growing the Common Sense Army so we can continue to grow this podcast and continue to ask the whys behind many of the events, many of the policies, and many of the headlines in the media every single day. And so this show is important, and we're going to keep growing this show until we have many, many, many people who are listening and understanding and trying to figure out what's really going on in our society today. So without further ado, like I say on every podcast, if you could do me a favor, the one way you could help get the word out about this podcast is by clicking the subscribe button right here on YouTube, right here on Spotify, and make sure you share these videos with people that agree with us and people that disagree with us, because like I said, and I always will say, the most important thing in our country is our freedoms, and the most important thing is that we can have conversations and disagreements in a way that's respectful so that we can kind of get to the other side and understand one another better, because I believe America is a place where we have more things in common than the media wants you to believe, and I believe with common sense approach to most of the issues in our country, we could really get somewhere together. So like I said, comment, like, share, everything. Subscribe to this podcast, get the message out, and let's continue to grow this Common Sense Army one day at a time, one podcast at a time. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Like I said, we're talking about FISA. Now, if you don't know what FISA is, it's the Foreign Intel and Surveillance Act. It's something that's critically important to protecting our national security, protecting this country from foreign attacks, from terrorism, and so it's very, very important. But what we have to talk about here, specifically when we're talking about FISA 702, it's very important that the government doesn't infringe on our God-given freedoms. Let me say that one more time. We have some freedoms in this nation, some freedoms that I believe and many people believe we get from God, right? You have the ability to think, the freedom to speak, and some of these things that we have in this nation are starting to get policed by the government. We see it every day with free speech. We can't have an argument. We can't even talk. I can't even say the V word on this episode, if you know what I'm talking about. It's the thing that during COVID, they made people inject into themselves. Yeah, I can't even say the V word, because if I do, my videos and my content gets removed from certain platforms, specifically on YouTube. So I'm going to try to stay away from using that word as much as possible, but we're still going to talk about it. But like I said, one of the things that's going on in this nation is if the other side doesn't agree with what you have to say, they're now censoring it across the nation. They're now censoring it on social media. They're now censoring somebody that doesn't go along with the agenda, with the narrative that the elites in this nation and people in power are trying to push. And so during COVID, if you remember, many people were silenced. Even people who were doctors were silenced for giving their opinion because it did not go along with the narrative that the mainstream media, the elites, and the people who are really in control in this nation and in this world wanted the messaging to be. So they silenced and censored many of those people, including RFK Jr. I talk about him a lot in this podcast because he's somebody that has been censored, continues to be censored, and called a conspiracy theory. And you guys know the story here. But today, when we're talking about FISA, the Foreign Intel and Surveillance Act, we have to have the conversation about freedom first. Because you cannot be free in this country or anywhere in the world if you do not have privacy. I'll say that one more time. You cannot be free if you do not have privacy in your homes, privacy to think, privacy to speak, right? If the government knows everything you are thinking, everything that you're doing, you do not have freedom. And George Orwell said it best in 1984. If you haven't read it, it's a great book that talks about freedoms and talks about Big Brother, government. Everything I just talked about with censorship is Big Brother and goes back to 1984 in the book written by George Orwell. We are living today in a modern day 1984. The government, you guys know it. I've said it on this podcast. I say it all the time. The current government and the current administration are actively going after their political opponents. They're going after using FISA now that we found out, and using FISA, they've been going after people who were at January 6th, even peaceful people at January 6th, people that did not enter the Capitol are being charged and surveilled and just being spied upon. Even the Black Lives Matter movement during the protests, they got people from those riots and those protests, and they have been spied on as well. And so if you really break it down, and beyond mentioning on the fact that they're spying in political opponents, spying on political campaigns, if you remember in 2016, Trump came out and said, I'm being spied on, they're spying on my campaign. And the news said, no, that's not going on, that's not a reality, that's not happening. But yet we find out later it was going on, and they used FISA 702 in order to be able to spy on the Trump campaign and be able to understand Trump. And that's where Russiagate came from. That's where the fake news story of Russia collusion and Russia being involved in the Trump campaign and Trump colluding with Russia in order to become president. I mean, they used that FISA 702 to be able to spy on Trump, and then they created a narrative, and some of those text messages, phone calls, information that they illegally spied upon Trump's campaign using was then later leaked to the media, which then became a story and then became what we now know as Russiagate or Russia collusion. And so I want to start the conversation again talking about freedoms and talking about the importance that some of the freedoms we have in this nation, and just by being a person who lives on this planet, you have freedoms that are given to you by God. You have the freedom to think. You have the freedom to be your own person. Now, you obviously have to abide by the laws of the land, but if we can't even have any kind of privacy, you don't have freedom. No one can tell me any differently. And so I want to play this clip so you guys understand what FISA is, what 702 is, what the issues are with FISA. And there's no better person to break it down than Jim Jordan. He's on the House Intel Committee. He's been a big part of, bringing this issue to light and talking about it intelligently. And so recently he was on the Dan Bongino show talking about what the problems are with FISA 702 and what the problems are with our government having the ability to use the Foreign Intel Surveillance Act to actively spy on United States citizens and Americans inside the United States on American soil. So here's Jim Jordan. Listen up. It's about a two-minute clip. He talks about all of that, and then we're going to dive into it and break it down right here. Here's Jim Jordan.
FISA reauthorizations become very controversial. Congressman, if you could just give Americans out there the downsides to this, because some might not know what's happened with this, how it's been abused to spy on people, Donald Trump. So why is this FISA reauthorization as it currently stands a big problem?
Well, there are two parts to it. The one part that was really abused was when they actually go to the court and get a warrant to spy on Americans. That's where they abused the system with President Trump, and they spied on his campaign. The second part is what's called the 702 program, which is where they go spy on foreigners and that there's this database of information. But when they're spying and listening to foreigners, they inevitably pick up a bunch of Americans, because you may be talking to a business person overseas who also happens to be under surveillance or whatever. And there's this database of information, and then they search that database using your name, American name, or your phone number or your email. And what we're saying is, you can do all the stuff you want with foreigners. In fact, we want you to. But when it comes to Americans and you're going to do a query, which is a fancy name for a search, you're going to search Dan Bongino's phone number, email, or name in this database, this huge haystack of information, you got to go get a warrant. And here's why: because this is the Inspector General of the Justice Department telling us 278,000 times they searched that database and didn't even follow their own rules, their own procedures in place. So we're saying, new rules and procedures aren't going to be enough. We think you should go get a warrant. And we even put some exceptions in there, Dan, which says if it's an emergency, if you see that there's a communication that there's an imminent terrorist threat here, you can go ahead and search that and bypass the warrant. But we think otherwise you should get a warrant, and we get pushback on that. But we think it's consistent with how we always do things in this great country. You don't have just one branch of government be able to search your stuff. You have to go to a separate and equal branch of government and get a warrant in order to do that. We think it should apply here.
So yes, and I will say he breaks it down very well. To understand FISA, again, it comes into the U.S. government and our intelligence agencies need to protect us from foreign threats. The Foreign Intel Surveillance Act allows right now under 702, and if it gets reauthorized in the House of Representatives, if it gets reauthorized moving forward, they'll continue to be able to spy on foreign, agents. But the issue with 702 is if a person in the U.S. is communicating or having any kind of conversations or any kind of connection to somebody who's not in the United States, who's a foreign asset, or somebody who's, they're able to spy on, they're able to then spy on the American who was communicating with a foreign person. And so he talks about it there. We're going to break it down. He says that in the FISA report, which was released by the Associated Press recently, there was hundreds of thousands of violations of the current FISA laws. Again, we know that the U.S. government is breaking their own procedures hundreds of thousands of times. And the exact number that he uses is 278,000 times. That comes out to be 761 times per day that our own FBI, our own intelligence agencies violated their own procedures when talking about illegally surveilling on American citizens using this FISA 702. And so when we talk about this, right? We know that Trump was spied on during his campaign. We know that Tucker Carlson was spied on when he was in communication with Russia. And it comes down to this: Donald Trump, or anybody for that matter, in the United States of America today, many of us have connections, family members overseas or doing business overseas. And so if you're having communications with somebody who is a foreigner, the U.S. government right now can search in their database and actively look at, spy on any kind of communication you're having at all. All your text messages, not just with the foreigner, but even text messages, phone calls, everything you're doing here in the United States. That's what happened during 2016. Trump, a businessman who had many connections overseas, golf courses overseas, many businesses around the world, was having business conversations with foreigners. The U.S. government, the FBI, then used that as a foot in the door to be able to spy on the Trump campaign, to understand what he was doing. This is under Obama in 2016 and in 2020. Are they spying on Trump today? We don't know. And so, again, I use Trump as the example because we know Donald Trump as a businessman, prior to politics, as a businessman who has properties, golf courses, businesses around the world. So for somebody like a Trump, for example, who has connections with foreigners, they can then use it as a foot in the door without a warrant, which is the whole issue here. Without a warrant, be able to now spy on Donald Trump just because he had connections with a foreigner. That's a problem, folks. That's a problem. It goes back to how I started the podcast. We have freedoms in this nation that we can't allow. We have God-given freedoms that we cannot allow to be impeded on just because the government wants to be able to put a foot in the door and spy and do different things. It's a major problem. And so when the FBI, in that FISA report that came out in the Associated Press, it came out that they had 278,000 times improperly used warrantless searches using FISA. That is a problem, and that is why many Republicans and even many Democrats today are advocating for non-warrantless searches for U.S. citizens and Americans in this nation. Right? The whole basis of FISA is this. We know that there are foreigners out there that want to do harm on the U.S., therefore we need to spy on foreigners. Again, I'm the first person to say that is critically important to our national security and critically important to our sovereignty here in the U.S. We need our government agencies being on the lookout, spying on foreigners. I'm fine with that. But the issue is you cannot use it as a foot in the door to warrantlessly search, warrantlessly spy on U.S. Americans here in the U.S. just because they had some sort of connection with a foreigner. Tucker Carlson's a perfect example, right? We go back to it. This goes back to before Tucker was released from Fox. He wanted to do an interview with Vladimir Putin. And he was having conversations with Russia and people from Russia to be able to coordinate that interview and make that interview a reality. The U.S. government then used that, using FISA, to be able to spy on, look at all of Tucker's text messages, all of his phone calls, and then the corruption sinks in. And when I say the corruption sinks in, if you remember, Tucker Carlson's text messages got leaked. So that was a result of a FISA warrantless search on a U.S. person because the elites in this country disagree with Tucker Carlson's politics, right? So two of the biggest names in the Republican movement, the right-winged movement, Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson, they're at the top of this list, the biggest names at this list, because we know it happened to them. But what else are they doing? Who else are they spying on? Are they spying on GOP political candidates? Are they spying on you and I? Are they spying? Where does this rabbit hole end? And that's the issue with having warrantless searches using FISA as a shield, right? And so I have to go back to it because right now Republicans and Democrats are on both sides of this issue, right? Dan Crenshaw from Texas, a major member of the House Republican Party, is somebody who's adamantly for warrantless searches happening because he believes that no matter what's going on, there should be able to the U.S. government and the foreign intel agencies, the FBI, the CIA should be able to spy on whoever for the protection of our government. My question is, why not just go get a warrant, right? Christopher Wray, who currently runs the FBI, in an op-ed recently came out and said that we have prevented kidnappings. We've prevented mass casualty events in this country using FISA 702. He doesn't give us any details, but he goes on to say, quote, this would have been impossible if the FBI had been required to stop and obtain prior court approval before acting. One more time. So he was out there publicly saying, hey, we prevented kidnappings, we prevented mass casualty events, we prevented terrorism, doesn't give us any details. And then he says, quote, this would have been impossible to do if the FBI was required to stop and obtain prior court approval before acting. And the issue is this. The same people that told you that COVID and the jab and the V word was safe and effective for use here in the U.S., the mRNA jabs were safe and effective for use here in the U.S., are the same people that are saying that this is safe and effective. The same people that are telling you this is for your safety. right? We give up safety all the time. It's a trade-off for freedom. When I say that, when you drive a vehicle, it's your choice to drive that vehicle. Is it always safe? You can get into a car accident by driving the vehicle. You're giving up potential safety for the freedom of driving your car. And here's the issue. We don't want to give up our freedom here because this is our ability to think, our ability to converse, right? Because what you have to remember, these foreign intel agencies, the FBI, the CIA, have been given back-end access to all of the telecommunication services in the entire world. So they could see every text message you send, every email you send, every phone call you have. They can listen in on conversations you're even having in your own home. And so, do we want that going on here in the United States, especially when we know that the government has overstepped and overtook their power? When we have a Department of Justice actively going after a presidential candidate? When we have a Department of Justice who used FISA to spy on the campaign previously, the Trump campaign? When we know that the government disagrees with somebody like a Tucker Carlson and then they use FISA to actively spy on him and then leak to the media his text messages to the media? Are those the people we want to be able to, without a warrant, spy on United States citizens? I don't think so. And Speaker Mike Johnson right now, he's somebody that I'm still up in the air on. Right? He came into the speakership. He's out there right now advocating for Republicans to reauthorize this FISA 702. And I have to ask, why? When we know of, right now, last year alone, 278,000 times the FBI improperly used warrantless searches. 278,000 times. 761 times per day in this country, the United States FBI and CIA were able to, without a warrant, spy on and violate their own procedures. So as Jim Jordan says, we don't believe procedures are enough. All we're asking for is if you're going to spy on a U.S. citizen, an American in the country, present your case and get a warrant. It's not a hard thing to do. FISA judges are on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For the FBI, the CIA, anyone who needs a warrant can get a warrant. And as Jim Jordan said, we've already put into place exemptions from the FISA 702 warrant requirement if there's a national emergency that's imminent threat to this nation. So their whole argument is, hey, if there's a national threat, we don't want to have to go get a warrant. It's going to take time. It's going to impact. And you see here, Christopher Wray says this would have been impossible to do if the FBI had been required to stop and obtain a prior court approval before acting. Well, Jim Jordan just said, well, hold on. We put in exemptions if it's a national security threat and it's going to impact, there's an imminent threat to this country. You don't need a warrant. Which, to be honest, is further than I would go. I'm of the belief that we have rights in this world just by being here. And in this nation built on freedom of speech and built on freedoms, life, liberty, and freedom, right? We should have the ability to not be spied on by our own government simply because we know somebody in a foreign country. And the lines are getting blurred so much right now because we have so many foreigners inside the United States of America today. Think about it. Illegals coming through the border, they're considered foreigners. Visitors, if you have family visiting or someone you know has family visiting, that's a foreigner. People have family members. Making a connection with an American citizen to a foreigner is not hard to do whatsoever right now. This power can, has been, and will be abused over and over. We have to require a warrant. And if there is probable cause for a warrant, they'll get it within 5 minutes. All you have to do is call the FISA judge, who's on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, present your PC, present your probable cause. And if you have a real reason in this nation to spy on an American citizen, and a judge rules you can get a warrant, you have probable cause, well, guess what? Our nation is safe. But at the same time of our nation being safe, our liberties, our freedoms are also safe. And so I go back to it over and over. When you think about what they did to Donald Trump in 2016, the Obama administration allowing and advocating for the FBI to spy on Donald Trump's campaign, it's now proven to be true. If you remember, Trump did an interview and said, I'm being spied on, and I forget who it was, said, absolutely not, you're not being spied on. We have no evidence of that. Well, now we have the evidence of it. We have the evidence of Tucker Carlson being spied on. Are they spying on Trump today? We don't know. We'll never know. Are they spying on you? Are they spying on me? Are they spying on... Again, think about this. If the Department of Justice right now is adamantly out there going after Donald Trump, and the administration, the Biden administration, actively is using the Department of Justice and weaponizing the Department of Justice against his political opponents, why wouldn't you think, if the Department of Justice and the administration had a loophole, a way in to be able to spy on Donald Trump or his campaign or people associated with his campaign, that they wouldn't do that? And here's the thing. If you know the intricacies of Donald Trump's campaign today, and you are Joe Biden administration, you're the Joe Biden campaign, and you know Donald Trump's going to spend money here, he's going to spend money here, he's not going to spend money there, you can then use the information that you are gathering illegally to impact the result of the 2024 election. Think about it. And so I ask, is this going on today? We don't know the answer, and we never will. And I'm out here saying I advocate and I am for the intel agencies spying on foreign and national threats to this nation. But I do not want your freedoms, my freedoms, Trump's freedoms, Tucker Carlson's freedoms, any American, even if it's a Democrat, even if it's someone that I don't agree with their policies, that's the difference here. They still have freedoms. They still have the right to think. They still have the right to be. They have liberties that are God-given liberties that the government cannot take away. We are in a country that is dependent on our freedom, the freedom of speeches. We should be allowed to think and allowed to have our freedoms given to us by God, not taken away from the government. I'll say that one more time. We have freedoms that were given to us by God, and the government is trying to take them away today. Our justice system and our Constitution and our government is based on the fundamental values of freedom and the fundamental ideas that you are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. You need probable cause in order to even conduct a search of someone's home. That's what our government, that's what our Justice Department, that's what our system is based on. And so when we see Democrats and Republicans, again, this podcast is called Why I'm Right. Normally I'm sitting here telling you this is why I believe the right wing is right. Right now, Dan Crenshaw and a lot of Republicans, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, are out there advocating against this. So this is not a right or left issue. This is an American issue. This is a freedom issue. And our founding fathers who wrote the Constitution is a document that was not written for the times. It's a document that was written to stand the test of times. That's why we have checks and balances, right? Jim Jordan said it in the first clip I played earlier, right? You need to have checks and balances so that you don't have carte blanche to just go after somebody who you disagree with. That's where American people cannot give up their freedoms. And right now, you got to look at this. And I hate saying it this way, and I hate making it a right versus left issue. But look at what the left of this country has been doing recently. Like I said, using and weaponizing the Department of Justice to go after their political opponents in the court on charges that no American, regardless of their political ideology, has ever been charged on ever in this nation. They're censoring people and impeding on the freedom of speech that we're giving under the Constitution. They're trying to take away guns in this nation, the Second Amendment of the Constitution. And now they're trying to actively spy on United States citizens inside the country just because you have a connection to a foreigner of some sort. Start adding these things up, folks, because the freedoms that were given to us by God are starting to be taken away from the government. That's what 1984 was about. That's what Big Brother is about. And if we aren't aware of it, or against it, or talking about it, this country, this world can change drastically. This world can change drastically. When they tell us it's for our safety that they need to spy on United States citizens without a warrant, or for the public safety, you can't say anything against the V word. You can't say anything against. It's absolutely insane what's going on. They're censoring us. They're trying to take guns away. They're trying to spy on us. They're weaponizing the Department of Justice against our people. And so when you add these things up and we look at the bigger picture and you add 1 + 2 + 3, all of a sudden you start to get the real agenda which is going on, which is to silence us. Because if we can't speak publicly, we don't have free speech, we can't post on social media, we can't put our stuff out there, we can't advocate and have the freedoms unless we agree with their agenda. That's Big Brother. That's 1984. When our government is abusing its power to go after American citizens, that's 1984. That's Big Brother. Under the guise of safety. Again, we gave up so many liberties, so many freedoms after 9/11 because people were fearful of terrorist attacks. And this 702 is the same thing, right? FISA's been around for a long time, but this 702 that came into play came in after 9/11. It's a post 9/11 amendment to FISA that now allows them to abuse their power against the United States citizens in this country. And when we know that our government and our Department of Justice and our FBI and our CIA, look at the credibility of all of those three-letter agencies in this nation right now. Why is their credibility damaged? Because we found out about abuses of power that impacted our lives, that will impact our lives. And so when those three-letter agencies are now telling us we need to be able to surveil on American citizens for safety, you need to take this jab for safety. We need to block this person's opinion for the safety of public. This is misinformation. Well, guess what? If it was misinformation, you should be okay with it being out there. Why? Because if you are in the right, and that's why I start every podcast here by saying one thing. I want people who disagree with me to see this. And I want to have the conversation because guess what? If they disagree with me and we can have a conversation about some of the big things going on in our world today, if we have the conversation and both viewpoints are out there, you as the listener, you as somebody who has your own mind can say, ooh, maybe he's right. Or maybe they're right. Again, I'm not sitting here telling you I'm a genius, but I'm saying that we need to be able to have the conversation. And when one side of the aisle right now, and it's not a Democrat or Republican thing, I'm talking about the government in power, the three-letter agencies in power, the elites, the establishment in this nation. When we see the atrocities and the abuse of power that has happened over and over and over. It's damaged their credibility over and over and over. So why are Republicans getting on board with this? Why is Mike Johnson getting on board with this? Why is Dan Crenshaw getting on board with this? When we're aware of the abuses of it in the past, 278,000 times it was abused in the past, 365 days, 1 year. And we're advocating for reauthorizing FISA 702. And we have to really start asking why. And so I want you guys to sit on this, think about it. You've now heard a little bit of what's really going on. But I believe there's an agenda at play here that is so far beyond the FISA 702, so far beyond what the issue, the headline is. The real thing that I think is going on is there is an establishment in power in this country right now that is actively trying to take away God-given freedoms. Government taking away God-given freedoms will lead to the demise of not only this nation, but nations around the globe. And that's what we're seeing in real time. Look on social media. Posts are being blocked for public misinformation. People are being censored for not going along with the agenda of the establishment. Now they're telling us we need to continue to be able to spy on Americans in this country under the guise of safety. When we have a Department of Justice, an FBI, a CIA that's abused power over and over and over. And we have to start seeing it for what it is. You have the freedom of speech. That's being impeded on. You have the Second Amendment. You have the ability to bear arms in this nation. That's being impeded on. And now if we can't even be innocent until proven guilty or have a conversation in our own home with our wives, with our kids, because we're scared that a U.S. agency that has 3 letters in it is somehow spying on us, think about what's really going on. This is an agenda to eliminate your freedoms that were given to you by God, by the government. And so, folks, as we move on with this podcast, we got a lot of episodes coming out this week. I'm going to be here 4 more times this week. I've said it before. We're going to dive into the DEI agenda. We're going to talk about many of the issues in this nation. Obviously, we have a lot going on. Israel, Iran, all the stuff that's going on overseas. Ukraine war is still going on. You're not hearing as much about it right now because of what's now happening in Israel and Iran. And I mean, again, folks, there is so much going on in this world that we have to start having the conversation about and understanding beyond the headline what's really going on. And so that's my mission. That's why I'm here. And that's why I'm going to be here every single day, day in, day out, having the conversation that maybe some people don't want to have. Because like I said, we need to open our eyes to what's really going on in this nation and in this world to have a real understanding that there are people, not good people, that are in power today. And I'm not talking about Democrat Party, Republican Party. I'm talking about true establishment on both sides of the aisle that want to divide you from me, want to divide the people that disagree with us on some issues, make it seem like we are so different from one another. Take away our freedom of speech, take away our guns, start surveilling on people. You're not innocent until proven guilty. We're going to go after our political opponents using the Department of Justice. Open your eyes, folks, because if you don't, it's going to be too late. And we are so close to it being too late. So, again, as we move forward on this podcast, a ton of stuff coming out. If you guys, as always, if you have questions, you want to be on the show, you want to ask a question, all you have to do is send an email at matt@whyimrightpodcast.com, matt@whyimrightpodcast.com. Send me an email. I'll get back to you. And like I said, I want to have people come on this podcast so we can have more of a conversation. If you disagree with me, come on the podcast. Explain to me why the government should be able to spy on United States citizens within its borders just simply for the fact that you have some sort of connection to somebody overseas, a foreigner. And maybe that's why they're allowing this many people into the nation, because guess what? If somebody you know is an illegal immigrant who came through a border that was wide open, now there's a connection to a foreigner. Now they could use FISA 702 to go after you. Or you got a grandma that lives over in Italy. They can go after you. And that's what I'm saying. We are so close to being beyond repair here. But I believe we can get through this. And I believe if we bring light to it, we could change the course of this nation. So we'll continue the conversations. Like I said, as always, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you share these videos with your friends, with your family, so we can grow this podcast one day at a time. And we can continue to improve and grow the Common Sense Army. Folks, this has been the Why I'm Right podcast, and I just told you why I'm right.
You've been listening to Why I'm Right. Thanks for being a part of the Common Sense Army. Our passion is to cut through the noise and confusion and to bring light to clickbait and outright lies in the media. Unafraid, unapologetic, real and raw. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram at Why I'm Right, on X at Why I'm Right Pod. And for more, hit the website at www.whyimrightpodcast.com. See you next time.